talk about Chief Keef. So Keith Kozar, he was born in Chicago, Illinois on April 15th, 1995, on the Parkway Gardens homes on the south side, what people would now call O Block. He started rapping at 5 years old and started recording around the age of 13. And he first started gaining some traction around 2011 with the Bang mixtape. It was popping on the hip-hop blogs that were all over at the time. His style on that album was a then underground subset of trap, kinda, which eventually became called Chicago drill, featuring hi-hats that skitter like gunfire sometimes, orchestral production in minor keys, and rapping about going on drills. You know what I'm saying? Talking about their day-to-day life, honestly. And this was a budding scene on the South Side in 2011. Videos were dropped straight to YouTube, very raw. Music industry, it kind of bypassed the music industry gatekeepers that were already kind of losing power at that time with the whole mixtape thing, and with the floodgates would really break open in like 2016 around that time. But yeah, this was like the first time they kind of lost power. Were losing power since like they first found somebody singing the blues in the South in the 1910s. You understand what I'm saying? That like this is the first time, really, that ever since then they've had a chokehold on the music industry. These gatekeeper figures, or people that weren't the people making the music, is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, so the videos were being dropped straight to YouTube, very raw. It was an unfortunate reality of some of these rappers' lives, filled with trauma, loss, poverty, loss of hope, bleak futures, and violence some of the time. And it was definitely reflected in their music. That's what made it very, like, oh, it's dangerous, you know what I mean? A lot of people liked that. So the legend of Chicago's Chief Keef really starts in December 2011, after he had dropped the Bang mixtape, when he was arrested and put on 60 days of house arrest for pointing a gun at a police officer, or something along those lines. In these 2 months, these 60 days, he really locked in with fellow Chicago producer DJ Ken, and dropped some amazing singles with videos straight to YouTube. And eventually the Back from the Dead mixtape in March 2012, which featured the song I Don't Like, featuring Little Reese. And man, yeah, this was included on that mixtape, and it became like a buzzing hit, right? Especially around Chicago. And it eventually caught the attention of legendary producer, you know what I'm saying, known trend hopper, neo-Nazi, Kanye West. You know what I'm saying? And yes, he recorded a remix of it with members of his Good Music label, Pusha T, Jadakiss was on there. Chief Keef kind of blew up nationwide after this, and record labels entered a bidding war to sign him. He eventually signed a $6 million deal with Interscope, with the promise of his own imprint, Glory Boys Entertainment, which later became Glow Gang, I think. During this time, the drill sound really blew up. Lots of fellow Chicago artists, got their name out there, including future superstar Lil Durk, people like Fredo Santana, Lil Reese, Rondo Number 9, Hirico, a lot of those Southside rappers really got pretty famous, you know what I'm saying? And he also signed to Gucci Mane's record label, 1017. I don't know how that works. Keith was only 17 years old at the time, you gotta understand, and he basically became an icon. His slang blew up, which to this day people use, you know what I'm saying, stuff like Glow Gang, or Glow Up, and Smoking on Ops, whatever the kids these days say. A lot of that stuff came from Chief Keef, a large majority of it, you understand what I'm saying? And they call it Gen Z slang And the music video for "I Don't Like" was directed by D. Gaines, iconic director, and the video itself became iconic. I'm saying Chief Keef, a lot of his friends in his grandma's house while he's on probation for pointing a gun at a police officer, and they're holding guns, smoking blunts. It was a sight to behold in the early 2010s landscape of very clean scrubbed, pristine luxury rap, a la Drake and Rick Ross, and even Kanye and stuff like that. It was very, very raw, very stark, very hard hitting. And yeah, what I'm saying? He infamously didn't show up to the music video for "Hate Being Sober," off his debut album on Interscope, Finally Rich, and he kind of just left 50 Cent and Wiz Khalifa hanging. You win some, you lose some. Finally Rich dropped in late 2012. It was a more mainstream, like, kind of packaged version of Back from the Dead 1. And yeah, Keef had become an icon in the span of like 8 months. His fashion was blowing up, you know what I mean? Like his True Religions, crop polos, designer belts, all that. And yeah, he kind of became like an low key like elder for the newer Gen Z generation of rappers. You know what I mean? And yeah, he did fall into some like codeine, Xanax, MDMA abuse around this time. Early 2013. And after, I'm not gonna lie, an incredibly dumb decision to go to do an interview with Pitchfork at a gun range. You know what I mean? Like this dude with glasses is sitting there interviewing Chief Keef at a gun range while Chief Keef is on probation for pointing a gun at a police officer. You know what I mean? That's yeah. They sent him to rehab for like a month. And in August of 2013, I think before he went to rehab, he released the mixtape Bang Part 2, a departure from the classic Chicago drill sound of Bang, Back from the Dead, and Finally Rich. It was a more sing-songy, auto-tune and effect-laden, almost like mumble rap and druggy, leaned-out sound. You remember when people used to call those artists mumble rap? Like, that was almost like a slur. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was crazy. Honestly, they called 21 Savage mumble rap. They call everybody mumble rap in that era. You know what I mean? 21 Savage don't even really mumble like that. He just doesn't ever, like, yell. And he has kind of like a southern, in a way. And I feel like that was just like, that's just classic South hate. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of those artists were from the South, Kodak Black and people have always hated on the South. Always, dude. I mean, all regions get hate, but the South is always like the one where it's like always a big conversation. You know what I mean? And I love Southern hip hop. Zero, Future, Young Thug, all that. Gucci Mane. And so let's get back to Chief Keef. You know what I mean? In October of 2013, his classic mixtape, which probably deserves its own video, Almighty So, it was released. He went even more deep into that sound that he explored on Bang 2, that druggy, hazy sound, a little bit of cloud rap influence, similar to Little B. I can't even begin to cover how big of a game changer Almighty So was. It's like the Bible for the new generation of rappers, not just in sound, but in the way they operate in the music industry. Half of it sounds like it's recorded with the Xbox Live mic, that amateur punk aesthetic. They kind of ran with that. You know what I mean? It's a very, very experimental tape, chaotic at times. Other tracks are like exuberant, what they would call like bop music of the West Side. That Chief Keef kind of dabbled in that style on this tape. This deserves its own video essay. But Bang 2 and Almighty So, that they were shitted on by many at the time. These tapes kind of weeded out the real Keef fans. You know what I mean? They kind of stuck around for this, and yes, the Almighty So has become somewhat of a cult classic now, though. Somewhat of a paid in full type album, a college dropout or a blueprint for this newer generation of rappers. You can literally name off rappers inspired by this tape all day, all day. Like a Velvet Underground and Nico type thing. Yeah, in my opinion, Keef is one of the most influential hip hop artists of all time, especially when you're talking about the newer artists. Like, Keef is kind of like the culmination of that Gucci Mane kind of. He kind of had that effortless Gucci Mane flow, but his voice would like sit on top of the beat more, like an Eminem or a Kendrick. You know, it very cut through the beat. He had an amazing cadence, you know, amazing delivery. Yeah, so by October 2014, before the release of Back from the Dead 2, you know what I'm talking about, Interscope dropped Keef. You could have expected that, you know. He's notoriously kind of did his own thing. He announced a few projects for 2014, but we kind of ended up with Big Gucci Sosa, a collab with somewhat of a mentor, Gucci Mane. It's a really good tape. But the one I want to focus on is the now cult classic experimental masterpiece, Back from the Dead 2. Released on Halloween 2014. You know what I mean? Back from the Dead 2 showed Keef switching up the sound again to something even more experimental and very aggressive, actually. Kind of like his earlier stuff. Mostly produced by Chief Keef himself, actually. His first journey into self-production, and it had amazing results, actually. The instrumentals on this thing are definitely Chicago drill, for sure. But they add huge, ominous, like, choirs and orchestras, kind of like uncanny sounding orchestras, almost like stock sounding MIDI instruments on top of that. It has very detailed and layered composition of the instrumentals, seemingly random beat pauses, all set over this chaotic, automatic, rifle-esque, classic drill hi-hat patterns, you know, deep 808 sub-bass, crazy sounding snares, hard-hitting. It has less singing and less effects than his 2013 output, you know, Almighty Soul, that era. Way more aggression in his raps, and they're very economical and to the point. Sometimes bars come out of nowhere, and you're like, that's almost hilarious, the stuff he says at like these random points in the song, just rapping about, you know, drill shit. And then he'll come out with like a crazy bar every once in a while. Kind of like Wayne, you know, kind of he'll throw in like a funny bar every now and then. That's kind of like, what did you just say? Yeah, it is these over-the-top ad-libs, you know, just assaulting your ears, you know, all this gang, bang. It's just like, at one track there's like an orchestra of ad-libs. It's just like, there's just like a cacophony of ad-libs just assaulting your eardrums. Chief Keef is like one of those rappers that, he was really one of the first ones that kind of like, the ad-libs took up as much space in the bar as the actual like bar itself did, if you know what I'm talking about. So, and that's very, you see that in Playboy Cardi, you know what I mean? You see that in all those new school rappers. And yeah, he uses a lot of space in this project, you know, a la Miles Davis in the 60s almost, like not afraid, you know, to just use short phrases, you know, and more ad-libs instead of these dense verses, which was pretty much the standard in rap kind of up until that point. It was beginning to change with figures like Lil B and Gucci Mane, but it really hadn't gotten like mainstream yet, that style. And yeah, he bends notes, bends like the sound of words to make them rhyme together. The atmosphere is very Halloween-y, almost like a horror film, sounding a bit gothic or neoclassical sometimes, sometimes psychedelic, with an atmosphere, you know, that's a dystopian, uncanny, and nihilistic. And yeah, it was definitely a risk to drop this project. Keef showed with this project he was like a true risk taker. You know what I mean? This was kind of where you were understanding that, okay, this guy really just does his own thing. You know, he's not like concentrated on what everybody else is doing. He's like the trendsetter. Keef Chicago was setting the stage at this point in the game, whether people want to admit it or not. it was setting a lot of influence for the later 2010s rap. Um, it could even be considered like outsider music, outsider rap. It's a term made for music made by musicians who don't have traditional music training, which would qualify Keef, I guess. You know, he didn't go to Berkeley. Um, or it could have an almost like childlike vibe, which I kind of get what they mean. Like some of this stuff sounds like something that a kid learning how to produce would make just for fun. You know, it has that fun. It's like scary. You know, it has that scary atmosphere, but you could tell the spirit of it is like fun. You know, or it could be made by people who are neurodivergent or have illnesses or disabilities, mental illnesses. And you know, this people have brought up the theory that Chief Keef is autistic before. I'm like not gonna go into that here because I obviously don't really know what I'm talking about in regards to that. But yeah, this is kind of like what they're talking about. I feel like him producing an album for the first time in his life, and it coming out totally unlike anything else. Nobody has even attempted to like replicate this type of the sound that Keef like curated on this project. To my knowledge, at least no like big artists, no mainstream ones. Yeah, it is really that out there. It's kind of like a Trout Mask replica type album. If Almighty Soul was Velvet Underground and Nico, this would be Trout Mask replica. The mixing was questionable in some spots, and the production toes the line between amateur and boundary pushing, but that was part of the magic. The attitude was very punk. Some of the beats feature like major key or happy sounding parts, which would influence a lot of artists, Lil Yachty and such. Some instrumentals feature elements that almost feel pulled off of a video game. And like Almighty Soul and Bang 2, Back from the Dead 2 was shitted on upon its release. But I think it aged like fine wine, and looking back at it in the context of the rap of the late 2010s, early 2020s, you know what I'm saying? It's a true like milestone record, I'd say. I think it's the most like Chief Keef record, if you know what I mean. You could even call it like post drill, you know what I mean? It pushes the genre forward that much. But let's get into these tracks, you know. The tape starts out with Fads, you know, DJ Tarantino talking some shit over ominous choirs. You know, Young Chop made this instrumental. This was one of the few songs that Keef didn't produce. This track and the next one, Paper, featuring Gucci Mane, start out with relatively traditional drill and trap production. But they're still very layered and hard-hitting, especially Feds. Feds is amazing. Keef spits some great verses. We're like, oh, he's back. You know what I mean? No more auto-tune, none of that. He's back to rapping. Yeah, so Gucci Mane sounds how you would expect, like a pre-prison 2013 Gucci Mane to sound on the next track. You know, he couldn't really miss at that time, in my opinion. Keef has a very aggressive, almost like growling, but higher pitch growling, if that makes sense, like that kind of cadence. And he keeps that cadence on a lot of these songs, very aggressive, you know. So it's kind of a slow start to the tape, you know, kind of what you would expect, Chief Keef, Gucci Mane, but this changes very quick with the very experimental cloud rap-esque whole crowd. The rest of this tape, except for 2 tracks, Stupid and Bees, is all self-produced by Keef. And you can tell. Trust me, you can tell. It's very different from the first 2 tracks. The monotone flow of Keef over the skittering hi-hats and a huge choir of the beat is something to behold. It's a few beat changes, some string stabs, you know. It's an awesome track. It's a good encapsulation of what the rest of the tape is going to be, in a way. And then we get to Finito. This is a certified hood classic. This song was everywhere in 2014, 2015, you know what I'm saying? Kind of Eastern sounding in some ways. It was Keef's first real big hit since the Finally Rich days back in 2012. Now fully independent though, and the ad libs are wild. The classic anthemic hook. Full of threats. Classic Chief Keef. Cops has a crazy instrumental. Odd time beat pauses. A lot more understated, but one of the most original sounding tracks. I love Keef's inflections and delivery in the second verse. So wacky, off the wall. Next standout is the Fun Deer. I love the earworm synth lead all over this track. Stupid is an intermission from Keef's production with Young Chop and CV Mix taking the reins on the instrumental. Very aggressive, classic Chicago drill, trap sound, dark piano. The almost industrial sounding Who Is That reaches an apex of aggression and intensity for the project. The song features 2 beat switches. The latter beat switch features some growling, rumbling bass that I love. It's a great example of the detail in this project. In the end of the song alone, there's like a few beat switches, so it's really cool. Smack DVD is Keef back with the growling flow. His tribute to street music, arts, culture, knowledge DVDs was huge back in the early 2000s. Interviews, rap battles, all that. It's legendary in the hip-hop culture in general. Cash In is a bop, you would call it, Very fun, almost major key with Keef layering on the auto-tune and singing, a callback to the kind of the Almighty So era. The Moral might be the most truly experimental track on the album, with it starting out pretty similar to the rest of the album, more ethereal moments on the project, but the beat takes a very, very sharp turn around the 1 minute mark. Starts to sound like a video game soundtrack with some crazy dissonant piano stabs. The beat switches again for the last verse and takes like an almost somber, like sober form, tone, you know what I mean? It's trippy, man. Wayne is my personal favorite, you know what I mean? With Sosa, that aggressive flow, referencing Cash Money artists on the second verse. You could tell Keef like Cash Money and stuff. He references them on a lot of songs. Early street rap, early 2000s street rap. Baby, BG, Big Timers, Juvenile, all that New Orleans. The snares on this sound like rifles. They're loud, some bars in tribute to Wayne, one of Keef's influences, King of the Remix, King of the Mixtape, Wayne, greatest rapper of all time, circa 2005 to 2007. This is the type of song I'm going to put on if I want to hit like a new max on a deadlift or something. His cadence, delivery, his flow, and his bars on this are just on point. I like that Big Timers Bling Bling reference, that BG reference on the second verse. I like the I be ballin' like I'm stunna, you be balding like you stunna. That's what I'm talking about with those hilarious bars that he sometimes throws in there. The tape ends with the anthemic banger Throw Them Bees Up, featuring Sosa talking his shit over some great production by Ace Banks. Keef went on to become somewhat of an elder to Gen Z rappers in the late 2010s. He moved out to Cali a bit before releasing the project to get away from, in his own words, the sickness of his experience on the south side of Chicago in the Parkway Gardens homes and his grandma's. He subtly started rapping about his new life in the quiet Cali, but he never truly left his Chicago drill roots, He started becoming a staple artist that rappers wanted as a feature, and by 2018, Keef's influence was pretty ubiquitous in rap music. You would have to not be listening to what rappers were doing to kind of deny it. And that's what I find the case is a lot of time when people do not noticed Keef's influence. They were like, I kind of probed. I'm like, why wouldn't you? Like, like I threw in some examples, and they're like, oh yeah, I kind of just stopped listening to rap music after 2015. You know what I'm saying? So like, if you talk to the kids, they're gonna know Keef. At least like maybe not the young ones, but like the ones that were like in, I don't know, like 26 to 30, like 26 to 30, maybe not kids, but like even like 20 to 30 maybe, they're gonna definitely know about Keef if they know anything about rap music post 2015. Yeah, so he started dropping a lot of projects. He started the Leak series, which featured a lot of Lucy's that he would drop around like his early career and mid-career. One of my favorite project series from him. Dropped Back from the Dead 2's follow-up, Back from the Dead 3 in 2018, which was very experimental as well. Sometimes almost more experimental in parts than Back from the Dead 2. That's probably Keef's best series, though, Back from the Dead. You can't miss with any of those, honestly. Especially the first two. Keef truly grew up quick, kinda, with his first worldwide hit at age 16. And now, at 30 years old in 2026, is basically a legacy artist, in a way. Which is wild. He had a benefit concert that was canceled by the mayor of Hammond, Indiana. When it was for Capo, label mate, influence on Keef's Almighty Soul era. He had like outstanding warrants still in Chicago, so they wouldn't let him do it there. So he set up a literal hologram concert in neighboring city, Hammond, Indiana. But the mayor had the generator shut off. So they feared a threat to public safety somehow with the hologram, not weird at all. And it's especially knowing in the mayor's own words, I know nothing about Chief Keef. Except then he goes on to say he does know something about Chief, you know what I mean? All I heard was he had a lot of songs about gangs and shooting people and a history that's anti-cop, pro-gang, and pro-drug use. It's crazy to say Keef is pro-drug use just because he raps about it, you know what I mean? But I can see anti-cop. It's crazy to say it that's wild, dude. It didn't really matter. I feel like Keef has always been up against, these systems, these institutions have always tried to trap him in one way or another. But Keef really carved his own path. And, that all he was able to get out was like, he was saying stop the violence and stuff like that, and then started like a few seconds of a song, and then